Good morning again. I'm pleased to be with you this morning, our third Sunday together as Elena enjoys a well-deserved vacation. I have so enjoyed these opportunities to share Sunday morning meditations with you. You see, I retired from parish ministry a couple of years ago, and I have to admit, this is a welcome but unusual experience for me. I've never preached to a congregation that had a mute button or a refrigerator a couple of steps away. I've been meeting with a small group of women from First Church. We created a Zoom discussion group when the annual women's retreat was canceled. And this online community has provided a safe and engaging space where we can share ideas and our lives. And each week, it seems, we find ourselves both celebrating and cringing what has emerged with this pandemic. We celebrate the goodness that is evident in the sacrifice and support and goodness of those who are caring for the sick and the poor and the broken and the marginalized. And we lament the division, the lack of civility and racism that is far too prevalent in our communities. We are reminded that the stress and uncertainty we are all experiencing can interfere with the development and demonstration of our better natures. Yes, we are learning firsthand that difficult times make some people difficult to deal with. We have a 95-year-old neighbor, Nadine. She's nearly blind, she's barely mobile, and she's absolutely delightful. Her body is terribly fragile, but her mind is fiercely sharp. So my partner, Tori, takes her grocery shopping most Sunday mornings, and they refer to that special time together as their church. Now, in exchange, Nadine passes along her old magazines. So recently, Tori came home with one of Nadine's periodicals entitled Lion's Roar, a magazine of Buddhist wisdom. And Tori casually opened up to an article and suggested that I read it. The title was How to Deal with Difficult People and Not Become One Yourself. At first, I thought this would be a great idea for a Sunday morning message. And then I wondered if there was a secret message in her sharing that particular article with me. The theme of the magazine issue was more peace and less conflict. How timely. It featured wisdom and strategies from an interesting collection of contributors, a contemplative psychologist, a Buddhist nun, an ordained Dharma teacher, a disciple of Thich Nhat Hanh. Not the company I usually keep, although I deeply appreciate their proclivities. And as I read the article, I welcomed the universal wisdom that wove many faith traditions together. And I hope you feel the same this morning. So take a minute to think about it. Difficult people. Chances are you know some. And I only hope you're not pointing to someone across the room. But as you think of these people and you conjure an image of them in your mind, do you ever wonder what makes them so difficult to deal with? The wisdom teachers through the ages have offered many perspectives on the fundamental truth that hurt people hurt people. Difficult people are those who are usually wounded and suffering, who have experienced great pain and disappointment. The Zen master, Thich Nhat Hanh, a global spiritual leader, poet, and peace activist, who is revered around the world for his powerful teachings and his gentle spirit, writes, people who are difficult, those who do and say mean things, those who can be offensive, critical, judgmental, easily irritated, short-tempered, overly sensitive, are not necessarily evil or bad people. They are universally people who are suffering and who lack the ability or the understanding to behave differently. When we look behind the difficult behavior of people in our lives, we may very well discover the sadness, the anger, the deep hurt that fuels their actions. Now take another minute to think. What is our typical reflex or response to people who are difficult? Do we respond in kind? Do we pull away and try and separate ourselves? We typically have an emotionally powerful reflex to those whom we find difficult. And it reminds me of the quote from German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, when he said, "Beware that when fighting monsters, you yourself don't become a monster." So the Buddhist teaching from Nadine's magazine, which, by the way, I believe is closely aligned with the teachings of our faith tradition, suggests we consider an alternative response, that we first seek to acknowledge and understand another's suffering, and then respond with compassion. And in doing so, pray that we might be some small part of healing that begins in those lives. We are living in a time when we see overwhelming suffering up close and with each news cycle. The visual and immediate access may be modern, but the condition is not. Throughout the ages, wisdom teachers and faith leaders have guided the faithful on a path of healing and reconciliation. And in the Gospels, we learn that even Jesus dealt with difficult people, people who faced difficult challenges or circumstances, which, by the way, could describe any one of us. And in reading the stories of Jesus, we can imagine his response to those who were difficult or those who were dealing with the difficult. His response, his reflex, was not one of recoil or retribution. Rather, his was a reflex of compassion. It was the spirit of compassion that enabled Jesus to see people for who they were and what they needed. Regardless of political affiliation or religious persuasion or legal or social convention, Jesus compassionately met people where they were and met their needs. And that was such a radical and powerful alternative to the status quo, then as it is now. And this was captured in the Gospel of Matthew, where the author describes the dichotomy for us as he teaches using the power of contrast. He starts with the tangible. Here is another old saying that deserves a second look. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Is that going to get us anywhere? Here's what I propose. Don't hit back at all. If someone strikes you, stand there and take it. If someone drags you into court and sues you for the shirt off your back, gift wrap your best coat and make a present of it. And if someone takes unfair advantage of you, use the occasion to practice the servant life. No more tit-for-tat stuff. Live generously. And then the author transitions to the spiritual. And again, I'm reading from Matthew, the Message version. You're familiar with the old written law, love your friend, and its unwritten companion, hate your enemy. Well, I'm challenging that. I'm telling you to love your enemies. Let them bring out the best in you, not the worst. When someone gives you a hard time, respond with the energies of prayer. For then you are working out your true selves, your God-created selves. This is what God does. He gives His best. The sun to warm and the rain to nourish to everyone, regardless, the good and the bad, the nice and the nasty. If all you do is love the lovable, do you expect a bonus? Anybody can do that. If you simply say hello to those who greet you, do you expect a medal? Anyone can do that. In story after story, we see how Jesus is drawn to the suffering, and the difficult, and the marginalized. And they are drawn to Him. Those who were physically, emotionally debilitated. Those who were bullies, dishonest and corrupt. In story after story, the light and love of God is revealed in the lifestyle of Jesus, who doesn't shrink back or pull away, whose reaction to the difficult is always motivated by compassion. You may remember the gospel story of the woman who drags herself along the roadside amid the crowds and the dust, just hoping to catch a glimpse of Jesus. She is sick and bleeding. She is weakened as her very life is flowing out of her. And with the end of a rope in one hand and dashing hope in the other, she reaches out to simply touch the hem of His garment. He could have recoiled. He could have ignored. He could have busied himself with the importance of the hundreds calling out for his attention. And yet, we read that he feels her touch, and she feels his energy. No matter the circumstance, Jesus was attuned to those needing what he had to give. And there's another story about a leper who's seeking healing. He's disfigured, disgraced, disenfranchised, debased. He knows and follows the purity protocol and warns Jesus as he passes by, I'm unclean, I'm unworthy. But then he takes a chance. But Jesus, if you will, you can change that. You can make me clean and whole. And again, we see that Jesus is fueled by compassion. And that revelation is revealed in his reflex. For in touching the man, Jesus breaks the purity code, which in the eyes of convention made them both unclean. Compassion trumps convention in each of these illustrations. Episcopalian Bishop John Shelby Spong describes it this way. Jesus worried not about the religious and social codes. His life revealed there is no rule of God except the enhancement of another's humanity. As he responded with compassion to those who were difficult or degraded, Jesus gave a sense of humanity to the unclean and the broken, who were changed by these compassionate encounters. In the Gospel of Luke, we hear the teaching of Jesus again to his followers and to us now. From Luke 6, be compassionate as your Father is compassionate. You see, in Judaism, which was Jesus' culture and religion, compassion was the secret name of God. So by being compassionate, we are called to our divinity and then better able to see the divinity in others, seeing all in God and God in all. I leave you with the words of Karen Armstrong, a scholar of world religions and a prolific author. In her book, 12 Steps to a Compassionate Life, she challenges us to bring forth the compassion that exists potentially in every human being so that it can be a healing force in our own lives and in the world. She says this depends on retraining our responses and forming mental habits that are kinder, gentler, and less fearful of others. May we be compassionate as our guide and our God is compassionate. Amen.